Welcome back to another LP Gallery tutorial. Today we're going to be color correcting and enhancing pictures directly in PowerPoint. We're going to use the picture panel. We're not going to use the default choices here because the steps are too big. We need to have fine control, so it's much easier to have fine tuning control using the panel with the slider bars than it is going through the menus here. In PowerPoint, you only have 4 options to fine tune a picture. So you have brightness, contrast, saturation, and temperature. Okay, so we're going to take a look at how these tools work, and then we're going to apply these tools to 5 different pictures. Each picture has its own little problems. Either we have to enhance or we have to color correct. Okay, so let's see how these tools work. So let's start off with brightness. Brightness is like shining a spotlight on the picture. So if we drag it to the right, we make the picture brighter. It's a uniform brightness all the way through until we get to pure white. Okay. Now if we drag it all the way to the left, we start getting it darker. So it's like we're dimming the light on the picture and it's getting darker and darker till it gets to black. Now contrast works with either the mid-tone grays or the dark and light areas. So if I take it to the right, I get rid of the mid-tone colors and I concentrate mostly on the dark and light colors. So if I go to the right, you can see what's happening here. Okay. So we lose all those mid-tone colors. We lose all the gradients. So you can see we're getting a lot of flat areas of color. So it's either very light or very dark with absolutely no mid-tones. Now, if we drag it to the left, we get the reverse. We get more mid-tones. So it's going more to the gray, gray, gray till it goes completely gray. The next thing we want to look at is saturation. Now, saturation is a tool that's used to enhance color in a picture. Now, it's a very strong tool and you're going to use very little of it. So when you're enhancing the color with saturation, the percentage is going to be very low. So it's going to be maybe about 110, 150, maybe 120%. You're rarely going to go over that because when you do that, it really flattens the color, takes all the soft gradients out of the color and makes them flat, bold, strong colors. So like this. If we drag the slider all the way to the right, like this, we're losing the gradation in the color and the colors are becoming flatter, more solid, and more bolder. Okay, something like this. So you don't have any real subtle gradation in color. It's just flat areas of strong, bold color. So again, you're not going to use a lot of it. Okay, now if we go to the left, we desaturate the picture. That means we are pulling the color out. So if I drag all the way to the left, once you get past 100%, it's going to start pulling the color out till we get complete grayscale. It's a quick way to make a grayscale picture. And of course, you can still use your brightness and contrast to act upon the grayscale picture. Okay, so that's what saturation does. And again, you're going to use very little of it. Okay, we're going to reset that. Now under color tone, PowerPoint only gives you one color control, and that's temperature. And what that means is you're going to go from cool blue to warmer yellow. Now technically we should have a second color control that goes magenta to green, but we only have one. So the temperature is used in conjunction with the saturation to kind of work with those 4 colors. Okay, so if we take the temperature all the way over to the right, we're going to warm the picture. So we have a lot more yellow. If we take it all the way to the left, we cool it down to blue and cyan. Okay, so again, with temperature, we're probably going to be adding more yellow than blue because you'll find that most pictures you take with your digital camera have a blue color cast, not a red or green color cast. It's usually blue. So we tend to go more to the yellow. Okay, so the temperature is going to be used in conjunction with saturation to help us get those nice enhanced colors. Okay, anyways, that's a quick overview of how those tools work. And next step is to see them in action. So we have 5 pictures to work with, and each picture has to be color corrected. So we're going to show you how to use those tools to color correct and enhance pictures directly in PowerPoint. Okay, so let's get started. Now the first thing to do is probably set your slide background to a neutral gray rather than white. If you color correct on white, there's a stark contrast between the image and the white background. That tends to make your eyes a little sore because you're looking at a bright white background and the color in the image. I find it better to neutralize the color on the slide background by just choosing a nice light gray. So I think if you make your slide background a nice light gray, you'll find color correcting a lot easier. Okay, so here we have a winter shot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. And we're going to work on this one, and we're going to compare it to the original. Now, typical of a winter shot, your digital camera, whether it's your phone camera or an actual digital camera, tends to put a lot of blue in it. Now, if you've been working with pictures for a long time, you can recognize a strong color cast in a picture. But if you're new to this, sometimes it has to be pointed out to you. So we're going to show you how you can find out for yourself if a picture has a strong color cast. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a rectangle. And I'm going to remove the outline. And what I'm going to do is make this just a nice gray. Okay, so maybe a gray like that. Okay, so this is a gray. Now, what I'm going to do is duplicate this. Now, what I'm going to do is pick a color in the snow. So I'm going to go to my fill. I'm going to go to my eyedropper. And I'm going to click somewhere in the snow. And that's the color that's in the snow. Now, by isolating the color, you can compare it to the gray, and you can really see a strong color cast. Now, these pictures are pretty obvious, but sometimes it's not that obvious. So identifying what should be neutral, like something that should be white or gray in the picture, and seeing what color it is, helps to identify the strong color cast and how to fix it. Since we have a strong blue color cast, how we have to fix that is by adding more yellow to it. Okay, so we're going to click on this picture. We're going to our picture tools, and we're going to go to temperature. Now, this has a very strong blue tint all the way through it. So dragging this over to the yellow will neutralize it to a certain amount, but not enough. You can see there's still a strong blue tint in it. So if I duplicate this, and let's see what color we have left, go to the same spot in the picture, you can see that the yellow has neutralized the blue to a certain amount, okay? It's still got a blue tint. Now, we'll probably never be able to get rid of the total blue tint because it's so dominant in the picture. Since we can't add any more yellow to neutralize the blue, what we're going to do with the saturation is actually take the saturation down. If we take the saturation up, all we're going to do is add more blue. So we actually take it down. So we're desaturating it into more gray. So I'm going to take it down, maybe about 85. Okay. And again, that desaturates the blue and should make it a little closer to the neutral gray. Now, we're not necessarily trying to make the snow a neutral gray. We're just trying to take that blue tint down as much as possible. Okay, so let's see what we have now. So I'll go here. And it's down a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some brightness and contrast. If you take too much brightness, we're going to blow out everything. Okay, you can see it doesn't take much. We're going to blow our footprints. We're not going to be able to see them. So brightness is very strong here because, again, we don't have very much midtones. Again, everything is either dark or light, so you have to be careful with that. Okay, so let's try taking the brightness up a little bit, maybe about 20. Okay, so we lighten the snow. Now the contrast. Again, if we take the contrast up, okay, we're going to lose all the detail in the footprints. So again, we have to be careful with the contrast. I think maybe about a 10. I think that looks pretty good. We still get our detail, so we still get to see our footprints in the snow. We don't blow them out, so they're still there. We get a little bit of color in the shrubs here. So you can see there's a little bit of yellow here, and there's a little yellow sign in the back. So we still are able to maintain some of the color. We're getting the snow as about as neutral as we possibly can without blowing it out. So what I'm going to do is click on this, and let's see what we got now. So I'm going to click on the fill, go to eyedropper, click the same spot. If we compare the two, you can see we have taken the snow down quite a bit. So from a strong blue to very light blue. The only way to make the snow pure white would be to take the saturation all the way down, which I don't want to do. So I think that's about as close as we're going to get to a more natural looking snow, because this picture has such a strong blue color cast. And again, PowerPoint is limited to what you can do. We only have one color slider here, and that's the blue to yellow. But with only one color slider, you have to use the other tools to kind of compensate. But I think that looks pretty good. Let's take a look at it in the slideshow. And if you take that, you compare it to the original, I think we did a pretty good job. Okay, so that's one way of neutralizing a color cast. The first thing you have to do is identify what color is the dominant color, and then determine how to neutralize that dominant color. In an RGB color space, yellow is the opposite to blue. So yellow neutralizes blue. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Now in this picture, we also have a blue dominant color. So there's a color cast that shifts slightly to the blue. Now it's not as obvious as in the previous picture, but it is there. So we're going to duplicate this. Okay, here's our neutral gray, and I'm going to duplicate that. Now, how do we determine the dominant color here? So what we do is we look for something that should be neutral, like the top of the rock and the driftwood. That should be fairly neutral. I've got this gray selected. I'm going to go to my fill. I'm going to go grab my eyedropper, and I'm going to click on the driftwood. Now, the driftwood should be basically a neutral type gray. So if I click here, and compare it to the gray, you can see there's your dominant color. So it's a lighter blue, but it's still a dominant color in there. So we have to neutralize that blue. We're going to go to our picture tools, and what neutralizes blue is yellow. So we're going to our temperature, and we're going to drag over. Now if we go too much, you can clearly see it's way too yellow. So we have to take it back, and I think I'll take it back, let's see. All right, so I'm looking at the driftwood here, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it to make sure that it's not getting a yellow tint. So maybe about 8700. I'll try that. I'm just going to even numbers. It just makes it a little easier. I think that looks pretty good. Now, of course, I don't know if there's too much yellow. So what I'm going to do is click here, grab my eyedropper, go back to the same spot. And when I do that, you can see I'm getting more of a neutral gray. So that tells me that's probably about as much yellow as I should put in there. Okay, so next thing is the saturation. Now we got to be careful. You don't want to go way overboard like that. So again, you're always going to use a very small percentage of saturation. Okay, you're never going to use very much saturation because it's way too strong. Okay, for saturation, let's see, maybe about 115. That looks pretty good. Now with just a little that we've done, take a look at the vegetation here. You can see there's a lot of different kinds of vegetation there. They're all got the different shade of green. Now if you compare that to the original, you can really see where that blue color cast is. It wasn't strong blue color cast, but what that did is just flatten everything out. So you don't see the variety of green here as you do right here. Okay, let's add some brightness and contrast. Now I'm looking at this rock here. If we add too much brightness, we're going to blow out that rock and it's going to just totally disappear. So what I think I'm going to do with the brightness is I'm probably going to take it down a bit. Just a little bit. And then what I might do is add a little more contrast. Again, I'm just eyeballing this. Makes it a little bit darker. Maybe about 15. Okay. So again, let's compare this to that. And you can see we have a lot more depth in this picture. Certainly a lot more colorful. And we haven't blown out any of the details. We've got a lot of neutral colors in here. Now I'm going to click here. And let's just make sure we have neutral colors. I'm going to grab my eyedropper. I'm going to click again, right in the same spot. And again, you can see it's close to being a neutral gray. Close enough for me anyways. Okay, let's take a look at that in the slideshow. Okay, let's make a comparison. So this one is basically full of life, where this one is very flat and very dull. So that's what a color cast does. Even if it's a weak color cast, it just really flattens an image. It doesn't give it that life. So again, this looks quite natural, and this one, of course, is much more dull. Okay, let's move on to the next image. So here we have a picture of a nice little lily pond. Now, this one's going to be a little trickier because we don't really have anything that's supposed to be neutral in here. We have some little white flowers. They can be kind of neutral, more towards the white, but we need to brighten this up. Okay, I can tell that there's a bit of a color cast in this. The lily pads themselves look very dull. They should be a little brighter. Okay, so let's duplicate this. Let's take this rectangle. Let's draw another one. Let's take a color from the lilies. So I'm going to grab my fill, grab my eyedropper, and we'll take one of the lily pads here. And we're going to see what it looks like. Okay, so there's the green for that. And you can see just by isolating the green, that's a very dull green. So again, there's a color cast in here. It's probably more to like the blue-green, and we need to neutralize that. And we need to brighten the picture. Now we have some little white flowers. Let's take a look at those. So I'm going to grab my eyedropper. Let's click on the little white flowers, see what we have here. Okay, so it's pretty close to being a white, not quite a white. So that's not too bad. But we need to brighten up the picture. Okay, it's a little dull. I think we need to add a little more yellow to get those lily pads a little bit brighter. Okay, so let's click on this one. Let's go to our picture tools. and we're going to take the temperature up a bit. Now, we don't want to take it all the way over because it's going to be way too yellow. Let's see. Too yellow, still too yellow. Maybe about 7,000. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, let's click here. Let's see what that does. Okay, that brightens it up a bit. Now let's go to the saturation. We'll take the saturation up just a little bit. We don't want to make it too bright. Okay, now you can see when we're doing that, we're bringing the deeper colors of the water out. Now obviously that's way overboard. So again, with saturation, never going to use that much. I think maybe about 125 looks pretty good to me. Okay, let's click here. Let's go back to one of these lily pads. Okay, it's a little brighter. It looks pretty good. And I think we have to brighten this up a bit. So I'm going to click here. And again, we got to be careful with the brightness and contrast. Okay, so we go overboard. Okay, we're going to lose a lot. Again, we have midtones. We don't have high contrast. We have a lot of midtones. Very easy to blow those out. So I think with the brightness, maybe about 5, not much. And I think with the contrast, again, we have to be careful with the contrast. Let's see what we can do with the contrast. We're getting some nice deep areas here with the contrast. Looks pretty good. And again, we don't want to overdo it. So let's take it back. And again, I'm just eyeballing this. I think maybe about 15. You can see we got some nice depth underneath the lily pad. We can see into the water here. We can see a pretty good reflection of the clouds up here. And the reeds are standing out really nice. And let's check out the white flowers. Let's see how white they are. Let's click on this. I'm going to grab my eyedropper, click on the little white flower, see what we got there. Okay, so it's a little bit brighter. So the flowers have been made a little bit brighter. The whole picture has been made a little brighter. And just with the little that we did, you can get a lot more depth to the water. Now let's take a look at that in the slideshow. Okay, so compare this to that, and I think you can see this has a lot more life. The lily pads stand out, the little flowers stand out. I think that looks much better than this one. So again, when you have a color cast, even a light color cast, it really dulls a picture and it really flattens a picture. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so here's our focus on a flower. So again, we're going to duplicate that. Okay, we're going to duplicate the rectangle. It's kind of hard to find a neutral color in this particular picture, but I know that the stamen should probably be a fairly bright yellow. So what I'm going to do is key on those. So I'm going to go to my fill, grab my eyedropper. Okay, now the stamen should be a fairly bright yellow. Click there. You can see that yellow is really not very bright. You can tell just looking at it, it's got a lot of blue in it. Okay, so the yellow should be much brighter. And I think that's what we're going to key on. We're going to key on the stamens because they should be a little bit brighter. Again, we're dealing with blue. So we're going to go to our picture tools and we're going to take the temperature up. Now again, we don't want to take it all the way over or we're going to go into pink. Now it's not a pink flower, it's a purple flower. Okay, so we want to control it. We want it to be more purple, but we want it to be a little more colorful. Maybe around 7,000 to 75. I think that looks pretty good. I think it still retains the purple look there. So I think maybe about 7,000. Okay, it maintains that purple color without going too much into the pink. That looks pretty good. Okay, so let's check out the stamen now. Okay, it's a little bit brighter, not too bad. Okay, so now we're going to add some saturation. Another thing I'm looking at is the ground here. Because if you look at the original here, the ground looks very dead. Okay, so there should be a little bit of brown mixed in with the soil there. So that's another thing I'm kind of looking at. So I'm going to add a little bit of saturation, not much. Okay, we don't want to overdo it like this, so we got to be careful again. We're going to add a little bit of saturation, maybe about, let's say, about 120. I think that looks pretty good. It makes the flower stand out. Now let's click on this. And that looks a little brighter. Okay, let's add some brightness and contrast. Again, we don't want to add too much brightness because the petals are very light. If we add too much brightness, we're going to just blow them out. So I think what I'll do is just maybe about 5 brightness. I don't want those petals to blow out, especially on the light parts. So very little brightness and maybe about the same in contrast. The contrast will make things a little bit darker. And again, I don't want to overdo that or we're going to blow out the petals again. If we look at the soil here, that looks pretty good. It looks a little more brown than it does here. Here it looks very lifeless. Here it looks a little more natural. I'm going to click on the yellow rectangle and let's check out that yellow color. And it's a little brighter. I think it looks pretty good. Now we can also do maybe one of the light colors. Maybe I'll click on the little white. There's a little bit of white here. See what that's like. And that's fairly neutral white. So I think that's about as close as we're going to get to color correcting this picture. Now let's take a look at it in the slideshow. And again, here's the color corrected one. Here's the original. And I think you can see that a little bit of color correction goes a long way in making the picture come alive. Now we could add a little bit of sharpening to this. So if we go to sharpness, not too much, maybe about 20. That'll just make the petals stand out a little sharper. It'll really make the flower appear to be leaping off the picture there. So a little bit of sharpness goes a long way, but just a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so we started with a winter scene. We'll end with a winter scene. Okay, let's duplicate this one. And let's duplicate the rectangle. Okay, so again, this has a color cast. It's a blue color cast. You can tell how dull the picture is. So let's see how much blue is actually in there. So I'm going to grab my fill, grab my little eyedropper, and I'm going to click somewhere in the snow. And if you compare it to the gray, you can definitely see there's a blue color cast in there. Let's go to our picture tools. How do we compensate for the blue? Well, we add a little bit of yellow. So we have to be careful. We don't add too much or it goes overboard like that. We want to add a little bit of yellow, maybe about 85. Kind of warms it up. Now I'm going to just duplicate this and let's take a look at that color. We'll go to the same spot and you can see we're getting a little more neutral. Looks a little better. Okay, let's add a little bit of saturation to this. Not much again. We don't want to go overboard like that. Okay, so we've got to be careful. And again, saturation is always a very little bit. I think maybe about 105% is good. I don't want to go any more than that or we're going to go too yellow in the clouds. You can see just by what we did with the saturation temperature, if you look at the bushes here, they're nice brown, not like here. And if you look at the trees, they're getting a nice brown, not quite like here. You can see the blue color cast has really dulled this picture, where here it's starting to come a little bit alive. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now let's go to our brightness and contrast. And again, we got to be careful with that. So brightness, I think we'll just spin up a little bit. I'm watching the clouds. I don't want to blow up my clouds. Okay, so maybe about 5. Okay, I think that's good enough. And for my contrast, again, I got to be careful. A little bit, maybe about 5 again. Okay, so give us a little more contrast. Now, again, let's click on this. Let's see what the color of the snow is. And it's a little bit lighter, looks a little nicer. Okay, so I think this picture looks much better. We didn't blow out the clouds, so we still got the detail in the clouds. We still got the detail in the snow. We've got the bushes, they're a little more brown. The trees are a little more brown. Looks a little more lifelike. Okay, let's look at that in the slideshow. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So compare this to that. Now let's take a look at the background here. So you can see there's a lot more detail here as opposed to here with the blue cast. So it doesn't take much, even in PowerPoint, to take a picture with a color cast and make it a little more lifelike. Okay, so that was our last picture to work on. So hope you got the idea of how to look for a color cast, how to identify a color cast, and how to use the tools to fix the color cast. Okay, so I hope this tutorial helped you. If it did, give it a like. Think about subscribing. If you have any comments, if there's something you didn't quite catch, leave it in the comments and we'll try to get back to you. So once again, thank you for watching and we hope to catch you on the next video.